Zilles. So I knew everything but completely blanked. This is a quote that a student at our institution wrote on Reddit. The student shared that they recently took a computer science exam that they felt prepared for, but during the exam they became extremely nervous and their mind went blank. You may have had similar experience as a student or when giving a presentation. As an instructor, you may have encountered students that have had such experiences. Now, this student stated that they knew about counseling services offered at our institution, but didn't have time to attend to them. The student wrote to the UIUC Reddit community asking for advice on how to cope with test anxiety. Now, the Reddit community replied with various suggestions, including drink tea, or drink Red Bull, and meditate, read self-help brochures. The community also provided a few less helpful comments, such as, test anxiety isn't real, it's an excuse for your low achievement. Now, it turns out test anxiety is real, and studies have shown that students with high test anxiety perform about 7% worse on exams when compared with students with low test anxiety. That can be the difference between an A and a B, a C and a D. Additionally, about 20% of students experience test anxiety. Now, the implications of this are abundant. They include lower course grades, poor classroom behavior, and lost academic and job opportunities. Therefore, educators should be aware of the test anxiety that students experience and attempt to reduce it. Now, today I will present our work that shows how social media can be used to reduce the test anxiety of students and how it compares to the more studied test anxiety intervention of expressive writing. One advantage of social media is the quick and easy access it allows for emotional and informational support. Additionally, the Chi community has shown some of the benefits of social media, including helping with major life events such as gender transition or job loss. Social media has also helped increase the accountability, motivation, and participation of members of online health communities. Now, expressive writing, which is writing about one's thoughts and feelings, has been demonstrated to increase the performance of students taking multiple choice exams. It has not yet been examined for open-ended exams where students report higher levels of anxiety, more uncertainty in their solutions, and higher difficulty. This work extends the study of expressive writing interventions to those open-ended problems as well. Now, the goal of our work was to answer the following two research questions. First, how do social support and expressive writing affect the anxiety experienced by students and their performance on open-ended tasks? And second, how do students feel about seeking social support or doing an expressive writing exercise to reduce anxiety before an exam? To answer these questions, we performed a single factor between subjects controlled experiment. The factor was anxiety intervention, where we compared social support, expressive writing, and a control, where students read task-related material. Participants were randomly split in these groups based on the conditions. Now, in total, we had 88 participants recruited from our institution, and most students were enrolled in a computer science data structures course. Our gender distribution was similar to the national average of 4-to-1, and most participants were underclassmen. All participants had C++ programming experience and had previously taken an open-ended programming exam. Now, our procedure went as follows. Prior to the experiment, students were first given an online version of the Cognitive Test Anxiety Instrument. It contains 27 questions and ranges from 27 to 108. We selected this measure because it has been validated and is straightforward to administer. It also focuses on the cognitive aspects of test anxiety, which has been shown to impact the test performance. Students were then randomly placed in each experimental condition. Now, participants assigned to the social support condition were asked to adapt a template message and post it to their Facebook timeline. The message asked for encouraging messages from the participant social network. People could respond with likes, comments, or private messages. Now, they were asked to make this post the night before the experiment and to refrain from reading the replies until they were instructed to do so. This was done to maintain some experimental control. Now, the next day, participants came to our computer lab, and they were instructed that they would have 40 minutes to complete 2 programming problems, and that there were 2 performance incentives. The first was an individual incentive, where participants were instructed that if they scored a 100% on the programming questions, they would earn a $100 reward. The second incentive was a group incentive. Participants were divided into groups of 10, and if the average score on the test questions was a 75% or greater, each member of the group would receive $10. The purpose of these incentives were to provide added pressure and raise anxiety of the participants. Now, students then completed the state portion of the state trait anxiety inventory. Now, this is a measure of in-the-moment anxiety and consists of 20 questions and ranges from 20 to 80. After completing the state trait anxiety inventory, participants performed a 7-minute anxiety intervention. Now, depending on their experimental condition, participants either read the responses from their social media post, read task-related information about the data structures course, or did an expressive writing exercise where they wrote about their thoughts and feelings. Following the anxiety intervention, participants completed the state portion of the state trait anxiety inventory again to assess a post-intervention measure of state anxiety. Now, participants were then given 40 minutes to complete the 2 programming problems and had the ability to compile and run their code. For the first problem, participants were asked to write a function that returned the number of nodes in a binary tree that had exactly 1 child. The second problem asked students to remove nodes from a singly linked list if the node string data element was longer than a given threshold. The function needed to return the number of nodes removed and the resulting changed list. The programming tasks were scored using a series of test cases and ranged from 0 to 100. And a pilot study showed that the problems were appropriate for our students' level of knowledge. So lastly, participants completed a survey that focused on their perceptions of the anxiety interventions they experienced. Now, this is a chart of the effect the experimental condition had on anxiety. The x-axis is the state anxiety of the participant after being informed of the incentive structure, and the y-axis is the state anxiety after completing the anxiety intervention, either the social support, expressive writing, or control. The dotted line represents perfect correlation and no change in anxiety level. So this is the data from our control condition. And you see it follows this y equals x line, and this means that the reading task had little effect on the anxiety of our participants, as they reported a similar pre- and post-anxiety score. Now, the expressive writing condition showed a very different pattern. The data points with a lower initial state anxiety, so on the left side of this graph, are higher than our y equals x line and have a higher post-intervention state anxiety. This indicates that expressive writing interventions raise the anxiety of students with lower initial anxiety. This was likely because students with low anxiety may not have been thinking about their worries and concerns until they were asked to write about them, bringing these worries to the forefront and raising their anxiety. On the right side of the graph, the data falls below our y equals x line. This indicates that the expressive writing lowered the anxiety of participants with a higher initial state anxiety. And this was likely because students with the higher initial anxiety likely experienced some relief from writing their thoughts and feelings, lowering their anxiety. Now, in our social support condition, we see that most of the data falls below that y equals x line. Thus, reading the supportive messages from social media ties lowered the anxiety of high anxious students without having adverse effects on low anxious students. To understand the effects the experimental conditions had within condition, we examined the extremes for differences between low and high anxiety participants. We classify participants as low anxiety if they scored in the bottom 40 percentile on the cognitive test anxiety instrument, or high anxiety if they score in the upper 40 percentile. We then compared how low and high anxious students were affected for each condition. So this graph depicts that comparison. So here's what we noticed. Look at this bar for the writing and look at where it goes. What this shows is that low anxious students showed an increase in anxiety, and this was significantly different than the effects the expressive writing had on high anxious students, where it decreased their anxiety. This indicates that expressive writing had detrimental effects on the anxiety of low anxious students. We also noticed that high anxiety students in the social support condition had the largest decrease in anxiety. This indicated that the intervention helped to reduce the anxiety of high-anxious students, and this difference was significant as well. In the control condition, we saw no difference in anxiety scores for low and high-anxious students. Now, we kept this classification of low and high-anxious students to examine differences in performance. If you look at the control condition, you'll see that the high-anxiety students perform significantly worse than the low-anxiety students. This is consistent with prior work where high-anxious students perform worse than low-anxious students. Now, if you look at the intervention conditions, you see a different trend. In the social support condition, high-anxiety participants performed as well as low-anxiety participants. So this intervention was effective at reducing the anxiety and raising the performance scores of high-anxious students. In the expressive writing condition, we see a similar effect with high-anxiety students performing better. So our results so far showed that soliciting supportive messages from one social network help reduce the anxiety and increase the performance of high-anxious students. The implications of this could include an easily adoptable method for students to cope with their test anxiety. However, our survey of student perceptions revealed an interesting finding. Students were uncomfortable soliciting messages from their Facebook profiles. So they stated that the behavior felt attention-seeking, might annoy others, was out of the ordinary for Facebook use, sometimes felt too private, and they didn't want to appear needy. This reluctance to disclose requests for supportive messages is rooted in impression management. Students wanted to regulate the information they shared on social media to influence the perception of others. In this setting, where participants were mostly CS students, the competitive environment may have heightened concerns about how others would perceive them. Such social media posts might harm relations in group projects or collaborations. Thus, improving on this method to increase comfort and may help more students adopt this effective approach for anxiety reduction. Now, the implications of this work include some guidelines for instructors and students. First, instructors should consider methods to reduce test anxiety to better measure the learning gains of students. Having knowledge of methods to reduce anxiety, such as the one discussed today, or other methods such as reducing the weight of exams, altering their frequency or format, can help instructors better inform students and better design exams. Instructors should also be mindful of the increase in anxiety expressive writing has on low-anxious students. If using this intervention, instructors might make it optional or only recommended to high-anxious students. Additionally, students should consider how using social media as an option for test anxiety reduction. You have the tools to implement this approach today, and in fact, I did. So about 3 hours ago, I posted a message about this talk. To my Facebook page, and I received over 60 likes, 30 comments, and I can say it was really calming to see the support from our friends and family. I'll keep going. This project also informs how we might more generally implement social support on social media for test anxiety. Using user-created lists to control who views the post, or other social media platforms such as Snapchat, which allows ephemeral messages, or Ask.fm, which allows a more Q&A format, might serve to make students feel more comfortable using social media as an anxiety intervention. However, these methods may also have drawbacks, including the length of time it takes to receive messages or the personal nature of the messages. Instructors might also be able to write encouraging messages themselves or have peers write them to each other as an alternative to soliciting them on social media. And in the future, we hope to examine how repeated usage of this approach affects social capital and perceptions of soliciting encouragement on social media. So just to wrap up here, our work shows how social media can be used to help students with high test anxiety perform better and have less anxiety without having harmful effects for others. Our work also demonstrates the effects of anxiety interventions on students solving open-ended programming problems, showing that expressive writing raises the anxiety of low-anxious students. And finally, we show that students are uncomfortable soliciting encouragement from social media for exams and discuss potential methods to reduce this feeling. Thank you.
Great. I love seeing researchers put their findings into practice. You have some questions?
Paul Resnick from University of Michigan. I noticed that comparing your control condition to the social feedback, just for the initially low anxiety people, it seemed like the low anxiety folks in the control condition performed better than the low anxiety people in your social intervention. Do you have any speculation about why that might have happened?
You know, I'm not entirely sure. It's possible that just kind of the uncomfortable nature of posting to social media had some type of negative effect on those students' anxiety. So for those low anxious students, even just using the control would be enough. So.
Marina Kogan, University of Colorado Boulder. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I was wondering if you at all explored in terms of who offers the encouragement affect the level of. So if it's strong ties versus weak ties, if that makes a difference in terms of the bump.
Yeah, so we didn't explore it in this work, but that is something that we definitely want to look at. We're kind of looking at right now how messages from peers versus social media, but we also want to look at stronger ties versus weaker ties. We didn't get a chance in this work, though.
Caitlin Syme from Georgia Tech. I wondered what your thoughts were on the timeline for intervention. For instance, the expressive writing condition perhaps would be a totally different effect if they had done it the day before the examination. Maybe their anxiety would have been addressed or worked out, or maybe they would have dropped out entirely. It could have been a totally different effect with a different intervention timeline. And I would love to know your thoughts on that and with your social media condition.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We don't know for sure what the perfect timeline is for each of these conditions. In our study, we take from a recent work by Deloatch and Ramirez, who used expressive writing right before a task. And they saw that this decrease in anxiety did occur and this increase in performance, but the task was very different. So that'd be something that we definitely want to look at. I mean, our interventions all occur right before the task in question, and looking at how that might change would be an interesting future work as well.
Maybe you would consider a performance task like that work too, and maybe it would create different results. You might explore that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Jake Thibault, speaker, Group One's research. My question is very similar to Paul's actually, but I noticed that you're in the low anxiety condition. The expressive writing causes